I'm 34 and my husband Noah is 36. We live in a quiet suburb that looks like something out of a brochure, tree-lined streets, friendly hellos, the usual weekend potlucks. The neighborhood is nice. Mostly friendly people, nice houses, everyone waves when they walk their dog. But if you don't have kids, you start to notice how the welcome mat only rolls out so far. Noah and I don't have children by choice. We're not anti-kid or anything. We just enjoy our lives the way they are. We travel when we want, sleep in on weekends, have our own routines. When we moved here 5 years ago, we thought it was the kind of place where that would be fine. And it was, until it wasn't. In the beginning, we were invited to a few neighborhood events. A fall chili cook-off, a 4th of July picnic. I even helped organize a Halloween trick or treat path one year, made goodie bags and everything. But over time, the invites started drying up. Not all at once, just a slow shift. First it was family brunches, then backyard campouts for the kids, then pool days that were just for the little ones and their parents. We didn't think much of it at first. People get busy. But then I realized something, unless I was hosting, we were never included. It got more obvious after a neighborhood potluck last spring. We showed up with a big tray of roasted vegetables and wine, and while families were seated around the patio, we were directed to a fold-out table in the garage. Not in a rude way, just a casual, offhanded, "Oh, you two can set up over there." The patio was full, but there was still room. They just didn't want us there. While we ate, Becca, one of the loudest moms on the block, walked by and joked, "Well, at least you don't have to deal with screaming kids tonight." She laughed, and so did the people around her. I didn't. I brushed it off, but it kept happening. I once invited a couple down the street over for brunch. They smiled and said weekends were sacred kid time. It felt like a polite brush off, but then I saw them later that same day at a neighborhood garden swap hosted by someone else, an event we weren't even told about. I'm not clueless. I started noticing a pattern. The same 3 women seemed to be behind every gathering we weren't invited to: Becca, Kylie, and Jenna. They run the Facebook group for the neighborhood, organize the block parties, set the dates for events. People call them the parent pack behind their backs. They don't just plan things, they control who gets to come. The weird thing is, Noah and I aren't antisocial. We've helped out more times than I can count. We found someone's lost cat during a rainstorm. Noah once fixed a leaky hose bib for a couple with a newborn. I hosted a pumpkin carving party in our driveway and gave out cider and snacks. No one ever says anything negative to our faces, but it's always there, this sense that if you're not knee-deep in car seats and playdates, you don't belong. Last week, it all came to a head. I was walking with Sandra, one of the few people I still talk to regularly in the neighborhood. She's in her 40s, has a son in high school, and tends to stay out of the drama. I casually mentioned how we hadn't been invited to the upcoming summer family fun day, and she hesitated. Then she told me that she'd overheard Becca saying that people without kids don't contribute to the family vibe. It was like a light flipped on. It wasn't about forgetting us. It was deliberate. That same night, a group text meant for someone else accidentally landed in my inbox. I wasn't supposed to see it. It was from a neighbor organizing carpools to the family fun day. The list of names scrolled by, dozens of families. My name wasn't there. Again, I showed it to Noah. He just shook his head. He's more realistic about people than I am. He told me to stop caring what they think, but that's easier said than done. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't post about it, didn't bring it up at the next HOA meeting. But something inside me shifted. If they only want kid-centric events, then fine. Let them have them. But I'm done pretending that we don't exist. There are other people here without kids. Couples, singles, even parents whose kids are grown. We're not invisible. And if the only way to be seen is to create our own space, then I'm ready to do that. I'm not trying to be petty. I'm not trying to compete, but I am going to make it very clear that adults deserve to have fun too, without juice boxes, plastic slides, and scream-crying toddlers in the background. The next day I started sketching ideas. A gathering. Something elegant. No kids. No guilt. Just adults, good music, and better drinks. I didn't want it to be a protest. I wanted it to be a reminder that we exist, that we matter, that we belong to. They had their family fun day. I was going to host something completely different, something unforgettable. The next morning, I opened my laptop and typed out the name, Neighbor Nightcap. It sounded casual but classy. I made a checklist. Venue, music, food, drinks, transportation, invitations. Everything needed to be intentional, not stuffy, not over the top, just something grown-ups could look forward to without feeling like they were crashing someone else's kid's birthday. I rented a vintage event hall about 10 minutes from the neighborhood. It was an old carriage house with wood-paneled walls, soft-up lighting, and a tucked-away garden with ivy and brick paths. No plastic tables or folding chairs in sight. Just real chairs, proper glassware, and enough ambience to feel like it mattered. Instead of driving, I booked a trolley to shuttle people back and forth from the community center lot. That way no one would complain about parking or feel awkward walking in late. Plus, it made the whole thing feel like a night out. I hired a jazz trio, upright bass, keys, and a saxophone. Nothing loud or distracting, just background music you could talk over. A mixologist agreed to build a custom cocktail menu, along with mocktails for anyone not drinking. The menu was mostly tapas, skewers, mini flatbreads, stuffed olives, prosciutto rolls. All finger food, no buffet trays or soggy pasta. Once the logistics were set, I printed the invitations, cream cardstock with gold trim, real paper, not an email blast or group text. I hand-delivered every single one in a matching envelope, sealed. Parents, singles, couples, everyone. It read, "Join us for an evening designed for adults to unwind and connect. Live jazz, cocktails, and conversation. No childcare provided. This evening is for you." Some people looked surprised when I handed them out. A few asked if it was a birthday or anniversary. I just smiled and said it was something new. A few people asked about dress code. I told them, cocktail attire. It wasn't a rule, just a vibe. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in early and took my usual seat. The room buzzed more than usual. Kylie, sitting 2 rows over, made a point to glance at her phone and say, "Guess we're not invited to that fancy little cocktail thing." It was loud enough to reach the people nearby. I didn't respond, just opened my notes, welcomed everyone, and ran through the meeting agenda. When we hit the event calendar section, I casually thanked the people who had already RSVP'd. A few parents looked up and smiled. After the meeting, 2 younger couples, both without kids, stayed behind to thank me. One of them said they'd lived in the neighborhood for 3 years and had never been to a single event. They felt like someone finally remembered they existed. Later that week, I got 3 more RSVPs, all from parents. One mom texted saying she'd already booked a babysitter and picked out her shoes. Then Becca messaged. She said her teenage daughter could help out at the event, pass around food or pour water. I thanked her for the offer but declined. I explained it was strictly for adults, and that meant no teens, no helpers, no one working the room unless they were staff. She didn't reply. Noah raised an eyebrow when I told him. He liked the idea but warned me not to be surprised if things got weird. He was already hearing whispers from a few dads who were unsure how their wives would react if they attended. Then the speculation started. Someone asked Noah at the dog park if we were launching a business. Another neighbor said they heard it was a wine tasting gone a little off-brand. A day later, Jenna posted a message in the HOA Facebook group. Some people think they're too good for community traditions, that was it. No name, no context, no likes, no replies. Just sitting there like a leftover casserole no one wanted to claim. While all that swirled around, I finished the prep. I walked to the venue again. Set the seating chart, not too stiff, just small clusters of plush chairs and tables near the band. I tested the candlelight at dusk and made sure every corner of the room felt warm, not dark. The cigar corner was my last addition. Not for smoking during the event, that wasn't allowed indoors, but just a quiet outdoor space with leather chairs, old books, and low lighting. A little unexpected, something for the people who like to wander away from the main room. By the end of the week, 26 people had confirmed. Not a massive turnout, but way more than I expected. The RSVP list had names I hadn't seen at a single social event in years. A retired couple from the other end of the neighborhood. A divorced dad who usually kept to himself. Even the new couple who just moved in 2 months ago. Nothing about it was loud or confrontational. I wasn't trying to compete with anyone. I wasn't making speeches or forming alliances, just sending out an invite and setting the tone. They could keep their bounce houses. We were trying something else. The trolley showed up at exactly 7:02 p.m., its lights glowing under the street lamps. Guests started arriving one by one, dressed in cocktail outfits and polished shoes. No one carried diaper bags, no one dragged along a stroller. It was the first time in a long while that I'd seen adults in the neighborhood walking around without being pulled in 5 directions. As they stepped off the trolley, people took a second to take in the venue. The hall was lit by warm string lights and tall glass candle holders scattered across tables and window ledges. Jazz floated through the air, low and mellow, and the clinking of glasses blended in as more guests arrived. I stood near the entryway and greeted everyone as they came in. Some brought wine, even though I told them everything was covered. Others handed over small gifts, candles and bottles, or just said it had been too long since they dressed up for anything. One couple had even booked a babysitter 2 weeks in advance and left their phones in the car. The bar opened early, and the signature drinks were a hit. The mixologist came through with names like the Neighborhood Whisper and No Kids, No Chaos. There were also mocktails with names like Silent Saturday and Juicebox Rebellion, which made people laugh. It didn't take long for the whole room to fill up with conversations that didn't involve school pickup lines or preschool crafts. One of the dads who came without his wife stood near the bar, sipping a whiskey and watching the room. He leaned in and said his wife thought this was some kind of anti-family protest, but he hadn't talked to adults outside of work in weeks and wasn't going to miss it. 3 men from the other end of the block pulled chairs together near the jazz trio. A woman in her 50s who had never attended a single HOA event before sat at the cigar corner with a glass of sangria and shit ended up swapping restaurant recommendations with a couple that had just moved in. About halfway through the night, I noticed movement outside one of the side windows. 2 teenagers stood on the edge of the garden, clearly trying not to be seen. I recognized them. One was Becca's daughter, the other Jenna's niece, who sometimes stayed over. I stepped outside and walked toward them. They looked nervous, unsure if they were in trouble. I thanked them for dropping by but told them gently that this was a private event for adults only. They nodded and walked off without argument. Inside, the mood didn't shift. It just got looser. One dad stood up and said someone needed to give me a medal for making silence fashionable again. People laughed. Cut. A woman in heels kicked them off and curled up on a love seat with a drink, saying she hadn't sat without interruption since Christmas. As the night went on, someone started handing out paper awards made from folded napkins. I ended up with a homemade certificate for Best Grown-Up Timeout. Another guy got Most Surprising Jazz Enthusiast, which he proudly tucked in his blazer pocket. Around 10, a couple slipped out early. Their babysitter texted saying one of their twins refused to sleep. They stopped to thank me and said they hoped this wouldn't be a one-time thing. Back at the venue, the jazz set transitioned to softer instrumentals. People moved outside to the garden, sat near the string lights, and shared quiet conversations. There were no raised voices, no loud music, no speeches, just small groups of neighbors talking like they'd known each other longer than they had. At 10:41 p.m., someone's phone buzzed. A message popped up in the neighborhood group chat. It was from Jenna. "Glad you're all enjoying yourselves while the rest of us parent." No one replied. A few people saw it, rolled their eyes, and put their phones away. Sandra came over and gave me a long hug before she left. She whispered something about how this did more for the neighborhood than any bounce house ever had. By the time the last group boarded the trolley, people were already asking when the next one would be. One person offered their backyard for a wine night. Another suggested a board game theme. A third said their cousin was in a string quartet and could probably play next time. No one asked where the parent pack was. No one seemed worried about whether this would make someone mad. Everyone just looked like they remembered what it felt like to be themselves again. And that was the whole point. The morning after the party, I opened the front door and found 4 handwritten notes tucked under a small potted succulent someone had left on the porch. No names, but the handwriting gave it away. Neighbors I'd barely exchanged more than a wave with over the past year. Each note said the same thing in different words. Thank you for hosting, for thinking of them, for proving that not every gathering had to revolve around snack pouches and swing sets. By noon, things shifted. During a dog walk, I passed 2 moms who had been at the party. They nodded but didn't stop to chat like they usually did. One of them crossed the street before we met on the sidewalk. Another neighbor who had RSVP'd but didn't show waved from her porch and turned away just as quickly. That afternoon, word started to spread. Kylie's daughter had seen photos from the event. Someone posted a few in a private story on Instagram. She asked why they hadn't gone. Kylie told people I was trying to divide the neighborhood and exclude families on purpose. That part got repeated enough times to stick. The next morning, Noah came home from a jog and said Becca had stopped him mid-route. No greetings. Just a straight line about us setting a bad example. He didn't argue, just kept running. By Friday, new flyers landed in every mailbox. Same glossy cardstock style the Hayway usually used. But this one announced a family-only ice cream social. In bold at the bottom, it read, "Celebrating real neighborhood values. I didn't say anything. Not in the group chat. Not at the dog park. Not during my grocery run." But it was clear the room had cooled. A couple who used to swing by for weekend coffee walked past our house without making eye contact. A mom who used to stop to ask about my garden now just gave a short wave from her car. On Saturday, Travis and Alina, the new couple on the block, invited us over for wine and board games. We stayed late, past midnight, sitting on their back patio lit with cheap string lights and citronella candles. They told us the party was the first time they didn't feel invisible on the street. It made them want to stick around longer. The next evening, Sandra dropped by with a grocery bag of lemons from her backyard. She mentioned she'd overheard Jenna speaking with the HOA president. Not about the party directly, but about tightening event guidelines so all community events would be required to include families with children. 3 days later, Noah got an envelope in the mail. City letterhead. Someone had reported his home office for a zoning violation. He's worked from home for 6 years, with nothing but a desk and a computer. The complaint didn't make sense, and the inspector even sounded confused when he called. When I walked past Kylie's house on a Sunday, I saw a new lawn sign, same colors as the HOA flyers, same font. It read, "We include all ages here." I passed 3 more signs like it before I hit the end of the block. That's when I realized it wasn't just gossip or cold shoulders. They were trying to make it official. Rewrite the rules to box out anything that didn't center around playgrounds and crafts. But something else happened too. A couple from the other side of the neighborhood messaged me privately. They hadn't come to the party, too nervous about drama, but wanted to know if there would be another. Then a guy I barely knew stopped me outside the grocery store. He whispered, "That night looked amazing," and walked off before I could respond. Instead of spending energy chasing invitations that would never come, I printed out a copy of the HOA bylaws. I highlighted every section related to gatherings, public space usage, and resident rights. This wasn't about one party anymore. It was about space, about who gets to decide what community looks like, and who gets pushed out when the rules are rewritten behind closed doors. The line had been drawn, not with signs or flyers, but with silence. And it was getting louder. 2 envelopes arrived from the HOA within 3 days of each other. The first one mentioned a structure compliance check for our pergola. It was installed over a year ago with verbal approval from a board member, and nothing about it had changed. The second envelope referred to a routine landscaping review, even though we hadn't planted anything new in 6 months. Sandra stopped by that evening. She'd just come from a community committee meeting. Jenna had been there, pressing the board to tighten oversight on non-family gatherings and reinforce guidelines for events that leave out children. No names were mentioned, but the message was clear. I called the HOA office directly. The woman on the line said there were no active violations on file. Nothing official had been submitted, just flagged for routine check-ins that happened to fall right after our event. I asked for that in writing. She emailed it over the same day. The next afternoon, David, the retired neighbor who walks his dog past our place every morning, invited me for coffee. We sat in his sunroom, the kind of space lined with old books and comfortable chairs. He didn't waste time. He told me the parent pack had a pattern. They froze out people who didn't fall in line, usually through quiet gossip, exaggerated complaints, and constant reminders about HOA rules. That weekend, Sandra, Alina, and I met at my place. We didn't make it formal, just a few people, some wine and light snacks. Travis and his friend came too. Everyone brought something. One neighbor brought homemade cookies and called the last event the first real adult interaction I've had all summer. Someone floated the idea of doing it again, but with a twist, 1 course per house. No big production, just walking distance, rotating homes, rotating food. It wasn't about sending a message. It was about building a different kind of connection. We picked 3 houses. Mine would be drinks and starters, Elena would do mains, and Travis would end with dessert. We didn't mention anything about it being adults only. We didn't need to. The Evite Travis design said it all. Neighbor circuit, taste tour edition. Subtle, elegant, no logos or inside jokes. We sent it out privately. No group posts, no flyers, just word of mouth. Within 4 days, 18 people had signed up. Most of them had never been to any neighborhood event before the cocktail night. 2 couples said it was the first time they'd ever accepted an invite here. 3 days before the event, Jenna's husband saw me outside and asked if they could swing by one of the stops. I told him space was already accounted for, and we weren't able to accommodate additional guests. He nodded, but his face said otherwise. Kylie posted something vague in the HOA group again. Funny how fast cliques form when no one's watching. No likes, no comments, just silence. Later that week, a woman I'd barely spoken to stopped me during a walk and said it was nice that things in the neighborhood finally felt fresh, not scheduled, not forced, but not controlled. Another man mentioned he liked that no one had to perform to be included. Sandra brought up something at the end of our last planning chat. There was an open Hayway board seat up for election in a few weeks. She said she was thinking of running. After everything that happened, she didn't want the board to stay one-sided. We didn't start a campaign, no posters, no hashtags. We didn't need them. The point wasn't to take over. It was to open things up again. Quiet moves, no drama. But the shift was there and everyone felt it. The progressive dinner started just after 6. People arrived in pairs and small groups, dressed casually but put together like they were showing up for something they actually wanted to attend. No kids, no strollers, no last-minute babysitter calls. Just adults ready to eat, drink, and breathe a little easier. My place was the first stop, appetizers and drinks. We had wine, light cocktails, sparkling water, and a spread of charcuterie and flatbreads. The jazz playlist from the last event played softly through speakers tucked near the windows. Conversations started easy: books, recipes, travel plans. No one brought up the Hawaii, the flyers, or the lawn signs. But the undertone was there. Everyone knew what this night represented without needing to spell it out. Elena's house came next. She served roasted chicken skewers, couscous salad, and grilled veggies with a honey glaze. Her backyard had fairy lights strung between the trees and long wooden benches covered in throw blankets. Someone raised a glass and joked, "Feels like the neighborhood finally exhaled." That line got passed around for the rest of the night. Halfway through the meal, Sandra stood up, not in a formal way, just casual with her drink in hand. She said she'd decided to run for the open Hawaii board seat. Nothing dramatic, just that it was time for things to feel like a neighborhood again, not a stage show. Glasses clinked. No cheers, no speeches. Just that low, shared nod you get when people are already on the same page. Dessert was at Travis's place. His husband had made chocolate tarts, and they served espresso and dessert wine in mismatched mugs and glasses. The tone was still relaxed, but you could feel how much people didn't want it to end. When we got back to our house just before midnight, I saw something sitting on the front step. A plastic bowl filled with melted ice cream and a sticky note taped to the lid. It read, "Try softening up, I didn't say anything." I threw it in the trash, cleaned the spot with the hose, and locked the front door. The next morning, I found out a few others had seen the note before we did. One neighbor knocked later and said it only proved why nights like ours were necessary. No one asked who left it. Everyone already knew. Later that evening, while people were finishing dessert at Travis's, Jenna unexpectedly showed up, holding her phone and asking which house her friend was in, despite not receiving an invite or responding beforehand. She didn't name anyone. No one responded. Travis calmly walked her to the front and sent her off. As she left, one neighbor's phone buzzed. A message came through, "Enjoy your little club while it lasts." After she left, Travis mentioned rotating these events monthly. Small themes, new hosts each time. Nothing fancy. No flyers. Just a break from the usual routine. Everyone agreed without hesitation. Cynthia, who has twin boys under 10, admitted she told Kylie she was out of town, said she didn't want to deal with the guilt trip or the "how can you support that" talk. By the time the last guests left, phone numbers had been exchanged, a private group chat started, and a decision made to quietly exit the main neighborhood thread altogether. It had turned into more of a scoreboard than a chat anyway. Noah set up a shared calendar the next morning. No public access, no Hayway approval, no drama, just a space to mark down plans that didn't need permission. At 7:13 a.m., I opened the door to find mulch spread across our driveway. Not dumped in bags, poured out by hand, messy and deliberate. I cleaned it up without a word and installed a second motion camera facing the sidewalk. That afternoon, a neighbor from 2 streets over stopped during a walk. He looked both ways before speaking. Said he'd seen Jenna's daughter near our place late the night before. Said he didn't want to get involved, but figured I should know. I thanked him and left it there. Lines were being drawn, not just between yards, but between how things used to work and how they were starting to shift. 3 days after the mulch incident, a new notice appeared in everyone's mailbox, this time from the UA. It outlined a proposed amendment to the community's event guidelines. The wording was careful, but the message was clear. All neighborhood-hosted events would be required to be family accessible, with minors explicitly included. Even though our dinners weren't Hayway sponsored, the timing said everything. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Sandra found out the push for the change came directly from Jenna and Kylie. They were trying to force it through before the open board seat was filled. We didn't organize a protest. No lawn signs, no group texts. Instead, we met at Alina's place, printed out the bylaws, and reviewed the process. A clause near the end stood out. Residents could challenge procedural changes with a counter-proposal, as long as they gathered enough signatures to trigger a formal vote. We didn't need a majority to stop it, just a quorum to force it to go public. That weekend, we walked door to door. Calm, polite, no drama. People asked questions. We explained that no one was trying to ban kids from anything. We just wanted options. Spaces for everyone, not just the loudest group. A retired teacher named Lisa offered to draft a neutral flyer that broke it all down without emotional language. We printed copies and slid them under doorways, left them in mailboxes, and stuck a few on bulletin boards. On Tuesday, Ron hosted discussion night at his place. Folding chairs filled the living room and porch. People brought water bottles, not wine. The tone stayed civil, but direct. Kylie called the progressive dinners exclusion in disguise. Sandra calmly explained attendance was always optional. One father admitted he used to believe all events needed to include children, until he went to one where they weren't around. He said it was the first time he remembered finishing a sentence in years. Jenna stood up near the end, accused Sandra of trying to erase families, and left before anyone could respond. Voting opened the next morning. Ballots were delivered with prepaid return envelopes. Participation was higher than any past year. 3 days later, the results came in. Sandra won the board seat by a wide margin. The proposed policy failed by 6 votes. Instead, Elena's counterproposal passed. Residents are free to host any type of event as long as invitations are clear and respectful, and no Hewa resources are used without approval. 2 days later, a card appeared in our mailbox. It was from Kylie. Inside was an invitation to her daughter's upcoming birthday party. It read, "Everyone is welcome. I placed it in the kitchen drawer. Never mentioned it again. Never went."